The committee will have its view on what time they need to scrutinise secondary legislation and what that involves. And I'm happy to listen to the committee's view, and obviously you'll be putting that to me in the form of your Stage 1 report. If I could just say that I actually feel, and remember I was in your position as convener in the last Parliament, and I understand that the committee wants to take full evidence on everything. The secondary legislation is going to be about our response to the Committee for Climate Change's advice to us. And our response to the Committee for Climate Change will look at the actual targets that we will be setting in that secondary legislation. It will not be about the action that is required in order to meet them, because they are informing the climate change plan. Although we will be working on the climate change plan throughout this whole process, we have a very good idea of the sort of things that we will need to do. Because as you said, we had stretching targets in the past. It's not going to be any kind of like ramping down of any kind of action. It's going to be ramping up of action as well. In terms of the time that the committee would like, I think it's important to look at the full picture, convener. From my perspective, initial consideration and written advice by the independent experts of the CCC will come. We will consider that. We will work on a draft plan. There will be a formal laying of that plan in Parliament. There's actually quite a lot of areas for scrutiny for all the elements about what is going to inform the climate change plan. The climate change plan itself, we want to get that to you as soon as possible, so that you obviously have your minimum of 120 days scrutiny of the climate change plan, but also I want to get that to you as quickly as possible so that it's not going into the next parliamentary year, if at all possible. CCC have said that they'll give us advice in spring. I'm hoping if this bill passes in the timeline that we would like it to, that gives the Committee for Climate Change more time, and we might get that advice more early than that, which would allow you to have more time to look into what that means for the targets. I'm willing to do everything I can to give the committee more time if it doesn't delay our climate change plan from getting put in front of you, because I think that's where and I've been watching all your sessions from your experts, and some of the evidence that you've been taking, some of the questioning is really in the space of the climate change plan. The very narrow bill here is about procedures and processes in order to put forward the budgets. The real meat in this is the discussion of the action that's going to be taken in the climate change plan, and that's where you're going to need the most time for scrutiny. And that's very much in my mind in terms of, I understand the committee's slight irritation about how quickly we're asking you to do this, but obviously we had a situation where we had a general election happen. We have a deadline of when we would not be meeting our expectations within the law with regards to the previous legislation. It has to be done within that time, but I want to give the committee as much time where it really matters by getting this climate change plan to you as early as possible. And that's really informed everything we're doing and how we're doing it.
I think we had correspondence from the DPLR committee saying that a super affirmative procedure might be appropriate in relation to this. So that's two committees that said that, which I'm sure you'll reflect on. Monica, I think you want to come in.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, really pleased to hear the Cabinet Secretary say that she wants this committee to have more time, as much time as possible, to scrutinise the action plan. With that in mind, would she be willing to share with the committee the work that's been progressed so far on the climate change plan so that we can have as much time as possible?
Well, obviously we're working at the moment that we're bound to the previous climate change plan, which is in action. It's still there. What I'm not going to do, Ms Lennon, is I'm not going to give anything partial and put it out in the public domain. I'm not going to put anything partial out there, because I think that is a really tricky situation to get yourself in. There's a lot of people relying on a credible climate change plan, which is informed by CCC advice, which is informed by our different approach to the various emission envelopes that we want to put forward, which is informed by the new 5-year carbon budgeting process. I think if you were in my position, you would probably feel the same, because if you put anything partial out there, if you put anything that is unfinished or not deliberated, and obviously a lot of this will have to go through, I work with all my cabinet colleagues on this, because it is not my portfolio that makes all the delivery commitments in terms of reducing emissions. It is a cross-government approach. If I were to put anything out there that was not fully informed by the CCC advice, or by the secondary legislation that we put forward, it would be partial, and it would be subject to probably a great deal of change. So I am not going to, but what I want to, hopefully what I want to leave you with is the fact that the work on the climate change plan never stops. It is an iterative process. The climate change plan is actually a living document that has been worked on by my officials and by myself and by my colleagues all the time, where we're able to be looking at potential areas in which we can get most emissions reduction in a fair and just way with the budget that we have available to us. And that is a process that never stops. Obviously, the key moment is to align it with the advice that we analyse from the CCC. And I won't be putting forward any climate change plan in draft form, either to the committee or to the wider stakeholders, until we have run through all that advice and discussed it with cabinet colleagues as to what that means for their individual portfolios and what it means for all the different sectors in society.
Just to come back briefly, because I think, taking the Cabinet Secretary's opening remarks about wanting to work openly with the Parliament, but this committee in particular, given the timescales that we're all having to work to, there needs to be, a degree of trust. So it's disappointing to hear that this living document that exists, that government isn't willing to share that with the committee. We see a lot of private papers and that information is dealt with appropriately. So I'll just maybe ask that again, or just for clarity, are you saying, Cabinet Secretary, you're not willing to share any of the work that's been done to date?
So, Ms. Lynn, maybe I can actually take that away, because if I may be able to write to the committee and tell you what work has been done, that's a different question. If I was to effectively give you a draft of the draft of the draft, that's a different ask. And maybe that's what I was really talking about there. But I am perfectly willing for me and my officials to look at all the work that's been done leading up to a climate change plan and what actual day-to-day work has been done in it. Perfectly acceptable for me to give that to the committee. But what I'm not going to do is give a draft of a draft of a draft, because I think that is... that's not something I think that any government would do.
No, I appreciate that. And just to say, I can't speak for the whole committee, but I know that I would feel more reassured if I had a better understanding of what that work looks like. Because you've said the work never stops, but on our side of the table, we don't actually know day to day what that involves and how much resource and time is going into that, and what progress is being made.
Well, I can certainly do that, because that is a different... I've maybe just not particularly got your actual question in the first place. I thought you were really looking for the sort of the document to be put in front of you. But I'm happy to do that, convener.
Same time.